Right. So thank you guys again for coming and being interested in this topic. We're really excited to share just like what groundwork does with community work and some not so great stuff with our legislation happening, but it's really important for the community to be aware of. So a little bit of a background about Groundwork Ohio River Valley and our nonprofit. We are one of 21 trusts from a nonprofit, Groundwork USA. They support to advance environmental initiatives, community health, and economic opportunity through place-based projects. So our organization is dedicated to the equitable restoration of the natural and built environment through Greater Cincinnati. And it's a pleasure to be here in Cleveland because I actually grew up here, but I live in Cincinnati now. So our organization works very closely with other community organizations, local government, and most importantly, community members to create environmental projects in their neighborhoods. So our organization consists of 3 different programs. We have our Green Team, which is a youth green workforce. So we actually have funding to employ and pay youth out of these neighborhoods. They gain insight on environmental stewardship, green infrastructure, and community revitalization through these programs. They're typically seasonal, and it kind of helps them build a pathway to a future in green careers after high school. Building off that, we have our Green Corps, which is an extension of this for young adults. A little bit more intensive training, leadership development, and really paves a pathway for a career in sustainability and green futures. And then Climate Safe Neighborhoods, which is what me and Tiffany work closest with, which is a program based on like place-based initiatives. We work directly with community members to tackle climate risks such as heat or flooding. Typically with historically disinvested neighborhoods of Cincinnati. It's more about supporting community-led solutions that they want to see in their neighborhood for a healthier, more resilient, unified, and resilient neighborhood. So that's a little bit about our organization. A little bit more about Climate Safe Neighborhoods' intentions and goals. So we create specific community cohorts with passionate residents. Tiffany will go a little bit more into how we identify more vulnerable climate risk or neighborhoods that are more vulnerable to climate risks in Cincinnati. But we create community cohorts. First thing is, connecting passionate residents. We then explore and communicate the relationship between the climate crisis, systemic inequities, and institutionalized racism within these communities, using their neighborhood history as a lens. We help to support the capacity of these residents to self-advocate for more equitable distribution of resources, and we develop and implement community-driven short-term mitigation measures for extreme heat and flooding. And then we, in the end, our end goal is to help impact policy to prioritize their community needs and equitable climate resiliency. So if you want, I'll like stay here for some
All right, so like I mentioned earlier, I am the GIS analyst for Groundwork ORV, and we use GIS data a lot in our work, mostly to identify vulnerable neighborhoods. And we have a lot of data that we look at to do that. A lot of that is historical. So in Cincinnati specifically, there have been a lot of policies over the years that were based on racist ideals. So first of all, there's like a zoning map that actually shows that all of the industrial zoning in the city of Cincinnati was actually placed within communities of color. And there's also a lot of evidence of like housing discrimination in Cincinnati as well. We have a lot of history of block busting, and that there was an urban renewal effort in the late 40s that targeted primarily African American communities. There were actually like entire communities of color that were just like wiped out, and that caused a lot of disenfranchising and a lot of issues that we still see today. And even now, like a lot of like new developments, like a stadium was just put in a primarily Black neighborhood, and a bunch of people were displaced. So like this stuff is still happening today. unfortunately. And there's also some history of redlining in Cincinnati. There is no official redlining map in Cincinnati, but there is this sketch that was found, which was likely used to discriminate against individuals trying to get loans from the federal government under the FHA, if you're familiar with that. So all of this stuff is like things that we consider, and then also we look at like current data. So we used to really heavily rely on the EJ screen, which you might be familiar with. We still do. A lot of that data was like maintained by nonprofits, and actually, like I downloaded a bunch of it myself, so Groundwork already has it as well. So we still use it, even though it's not being updated anymore, unfortunately, because of our current administration. So that's like something that we really reference, especially all of the air quality data that's within the EJ screen. Air quality is a huge issue in Cincinnati, and it really disproportionately affects our communities of color. So those are things too that we consider when identifying the neighborhoods. And recently we worked with some college students to actually combine all of our data into like one index, and we use that to help us identify neighborhoods. But we don't just look at the data, we also like go into neighborhoods and talk to individuals to see if they actually want the program and if they need it. I think that that's a really important thing to touch on as well. Like not just to like look at data to make all of your decisions, but actually talk to people as well. Yeah. And then I can touch on.
So we actually used to have a program specifically for community science. Now it's kind of just integrated into our existing programs. But what community science means, it's an approach where residents participate in collecting, analyzing, and interpreting and using data to better understand and improve their own neighborhood. It's very important for community members not only to know like what air quality means, but how to see what your air quality is like outside your own door and know how to interpret that data and how to use that to go to local government and advocate for, better regulations in your neighborhood. Instead of data being collected on communities, it should be done with communities so they have a better understanding of what's happening in their neighborhood. They are the experts of their own lived experiences, and community science offers those tools to be able to turn that knowledge into drive for change in their neighborhood. And it ensures that the realities aren't overlooked. So this is a huge, issue, I'm sure, everywhere. But we do try and do as much community science as possible in our groundwork organization so we can make sure that these community members are educated. And then we're going to talk a little bit about our air quality programs that we've hosted. So we've actually done air quality programs the last 3 summers. This is just one of our community science programs that we've done in our organization. So with these last 3 air quality programs, we've trained 320 youth and 50 neighborhood residents, and they all were compensated for their work on air quality monitoring techniques and air pollution health education. And this data was collected to be able to use towards mitigation efforts and just as a reference for community members to look at. We're going to get a little bit more, Tiffany's going to talk a little bit more about what these programs consisted of and how we train these community members. This is a little picture of like one aspect of the air quality program was not just building the air quality monitors and learning how to read them, but actually going around on bikes or walking and taking the air quality on these mobile routes. So this is one of the routes that was taken in a neighborhood called Lower Price Hill in Cincinnati, which is actually the first neighborhood where Climate Safe Neighborhoods was born and where our office is at. So I'll let Tiffany back up here. This is all the sciencey stuff.
Right. So before we get into the work that we did with the residents and also the youth that we worked with, I wanted to give you guys some background about air quality and why this work is important, specifically in Cincinnati especially. So the main pollution source that we are concerned with in Cincinnati is PM 2.5. The reason that we care about PM 2.5 is it's a small enough particle that it can pass through a person's nose hairs and get into their lungs and then it can pass through their lungs into their blood vessels. It causes problems like asthma, and it can also lead to heart disease. So children and older adults are especially really vulnerable to it. And Cincinnati, unfortunately, has like really high PM 2.5 levels compared to the rest of the country. So there are some neighborhoods that we work in that are in the 99th percentile for PM 2.5. So that's huge. Like that means that their PM 2.5 levels are higher than like 99% of like the rest of the country, which is wild. So our main pollution sources in Cincinnati are traffic. So we have like two major highway systems in Cincinnati that run through it, and those carry like I believe like 100,000 vehicles each a day. So that's a lot of emissions. We also have a lot of factories in Cincinnati. It is historically a very industrial city, and it remains to be that way, though to a lesser degree. Also, like on an individual level, we get like tobacco smoke as a really major like source of PM 2.5. And cooking, especially with gas, is going to increase your PM 2.5 exposure as well. And there's wildfires. You guys may have remembered over the past few summers, we've had wildfires. That's contributing to PM 2.5 quite a bit. And in Cincinnati, we had some major like wildfire smoke. You could like see it in the air, like it was very thick. It didn't get quite as bad as like New York City, but it was definitely very noticeable. And I forgot to mention that PM 2.5 was also like the fifth ranking mortality risk factor in 2015, with 4.2 million deaths attributed to it. So it's pretty serious. Even though you can't like see it, so I think that is like one of the reasons that people don't really think about it sometimes, because it's a risk factor that we can't see, which kind of reminds me of how we look at climate change. Yeah, but all right. So like I mentioned before, there's like long-term effects with PM 2.5, asthma, lung cancer, premature death. And in short term, you have like asthma issues, mental health issues, stroke, heart attacks, and nose irritation. So do you guys remember did you experience the wildfires like at the summer? Yeah. So did you guys experience like the eye and nose irritation? Yeah, I know that I did. So like that is kind of like what some of these neighborhoods are experiencing on like a day-to-day basis because of their air quality. Okay, so air pollution in Cincinnati, like I said before, is very high compared to the rest of the country. According to the American Lung Association, so the Cincinnati area was ranked 12th in the country for air quality in 2022. I think that this number is now 18. I looked at it the other day, which isn't improving, but still like pretty high. Especially considering the population of Cincinnati, you wouldn't think it would be like all the way up on the list where it is. Yeah, so we have a population in the metro area of 2.2 million. And like I said, we have like two major highway systems that carry like 10 million trucks per year, and 60,000 diesel trucks on a day-to-day basis. And we also have coal-fired power plants around, which also contribute a lot to the PM 2.5. Like I said, we did programming with adults and also youth. The adult program, it consisted of air pollution hazard training, which you guys got a very short and sweet version of. And they also got some green infrastructure training, and this was designed to teach them about the green infrastructure stuff that could be done to mitigate some of the air quality issues. And then they also, of course, were trained on how to operate their air quality monitors. So I didn't mention this, but the whole purpose of it was to give residents air quality monitors that they would put in their homes. And then they collected data for a week at their house. And then also some of them like clicked on air quality monitors, Airbnb to be specific, and they walked their route to work, or they biked, or they drove a car, or whatever it was. Also, at the end of the resident program in Lower Price Hill, we actually installed a pollinator garden, which is what that is right there. This is actually located right next to an extremely busy highway. I used to drive by this all the time to work, and and once it grows up, the idea is that it's going to help improve the air quality, which might seem like a very small measure, but at least it's something in the right direction. All right, and we also created a air quality dashboard. I did not actually do this, but I did work with some of our data consultants on this. This is all the data that was collected from residents during the program. All of the green lines that you see are people's route to work. And you can see that some people have like pretty high exposure. Like there's some people that have like hazardous exposure in their neighborhood on their way to work. But a lot of them are a lot of it's green, which is good. We have different air quality monitors that we use, and we track these pollutants that are listed here. Mostly, again, we're concerned with PM 2.5, but all of the pollutants that you see are like health risks, so we do track them. We use TimTops, which are shown here. The first two pictures going from like left to right are TimTops, and then the white one is AirBeam. And I think it looks like a little ghost. So yeah, that's what that is. And we also have some stationary monitors that we put up in neighborhoods. This is kind of like similar to the EPA's stationary monitors, but of course the EPA has like very stringent, like very scientifically accurate air quality monitors. And these are not like quite to that level, but it's something, and we'll talk about this more later, but of course the EPA has like very scientifically accurate air quality monitors, but there's so many gaps, and that's like the issue that we're trying to address. Like actually figuring out what the air quality is where people are living, instead of relying on the EPA monitors, which are often placed on top of like a fire station, for example, which it's good to get data there, but like we don't know what people are actually exposed to like in their day-to-day lives. This is another image of the TimTop. This is what the residents had in their homes. It was interesting. We had like some residents that were smokers, and you could actually like see anytime they started smoking, like in the data, and it was significant. Like the change in air quality was like major. It would go from like 50 to 400. Like it was really intense. Also, you could see the same, not as extreme of a jump, but you could see some jump every time they cooked. So I personally will open up my window every time I cook now because I have a gas stove, and I recommend that to anyone. Like Sydney was talking about, we also did some air quality monitoring on red bikes. So if you don't know what red bikes are, there are like rideshare bikes that we have in Cincinnati, and the green teams, like each one of them for a day would come out and take a ride up around this route that you see, the red route, and they would have like a TimTop monitor in their bike basket, and it would collect data as they went. And that data is also on that dashboard that I'm going to show later. But yeah, this was really fun. I got to go with them once, and it was like one of my favorite days ever at work. Yeah, it was really cool. And we also had like a walking route too, and that's for safety reasons. That stretch of road is really dangerous. Like I was even afraid walking it, to be honest. So yeah, we had like a walking route as well. And the most interesting part for me, and the part that I was most involved with, was the air quality monitor building. And I actually have one in my bag that I should have gotten out, but I'll get it out in a second. But we had each of the green teams, they would come in for a day and they would solder together different components of an air quality monitor. And then they would watch as I like program the monitors, and then they could see like what their monitor was reading for the air quality in that room that day. It was very cool. We had a lot of kids that had never soldered before or looked at any sort of like programming stuff before, so that was like really cool to expose them to that. Yeah, and I'll just get into a little bit more of the details with it. In addition, we also gave them some air quality like health education. We had an intern come from the medical school actually, and she did a really excellent job like describing to the kids the health impacts of air quality. And their data was also like sent or collected and then like displayed on our website, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But here are some pictures of the kids doing soldering. Soldering is like it's a pretty difficult skill. Excuse me. It takes a bit of practice to get used to it, and it's it's a very delicate thing to do. So it's very similar to welding if anyone's ever welded before. But yeah, the kids had to be like supervised, and they had to practice a little bit, and so sometimes it was more challenging with some kids than others, you know. And yeah, you can like see the process here. And then we also used like electrical conduit boxes to put the air quality monitors in. And you can see that they're drilling holes over here. And the reason they're doing that is to get airflow into the box. And they also like painted them later too. And that's to help with like temperature issues. So this was the part that I was most involved with. In order for the monitors to work, you have to put code onto them. And the original code was written by a board member of ours who loves doing this type of thing just for fun. He coded his own like bird feeder, monitor, like for fun. And he also coded his own like automatic pet feeder. So he's like really into this type of thing. So yeah, originally we had code that sent the data to MATLAB's ThingSpeak, which is a database where you could send stuff like from small devices like the air quality monitor, and it can get displayed on like a dashboard. Eventually that code didn't work anymore because it relied on libraries that were not automatically updating. And it was a big challenge for us because Carlos didn't know how to fix it himself. So we actually started using an organization called Air Gradient to help us with this. And they do a very similar like coding process, but they put all of their monitors onto the air gradient dashboard. So yeah, there's that. Now we used Arduino IDE to put the code onto the air quality monitors. Yeah. We had to purchase the different components separately, and we got all of the components from Amazon. The PM 2.5 sensor is that the big blue box right there. There's a fan inside of it that sucks the air in, and then it reads like what the PM 2.5 level is. And then in the center there is the Wi-Fi component, which is what you need to send the data like to whatever database you're using. And then that really small square is the temperature and humidity sensor. And that wasn't really something that we like really wanted, like was vital to collect, but it was nice to have. And it was a very cheap like component to add, so we just put it on there. All right, like I mentioned, we did soldering with the kids. So we had 4 soldering irons that we bought. I recommend not getting the cheapest ones because we did that and they did not work well. And we actually had to replace some of them because they stopped working. Which reminds me, a lot of the components that you buy are very inexpensive. And sometimes they will just not work when you buy them, like right out of the box. So you have to like think about stuff like that. Like a lot of these air quality monitors will not work for many reasons, but some of them will. Yeah, so we had to get irons and we had to get lead-free soldering wire and wire strippers. And like I said, there was an adult that was there supervising the kids throughout this process. And I was one of the adults that was helping some of the kids. So they practiced first, and then they actually soldered the wires together. In doing that, like they had to follow a very particular process, like where the yellow wire had to go to like T1, and it was very like complicated. So there's a lot of like places to make mistakes, but I mean the kids are learning the whole time, and that's like what really matters. Yeah, and this is a slide that actually shows like me demonstrating what's called flashing the monitors. So that is the term that's used to refer to like uploading the code onto the monitor. So the kids actually like watched me demo putting the code onto the monitor, and then also they saw a demo of me putting Wi-Fi on or connecting the monitor to Wi-Fi. One big issue that I've run into is these monitors will only connect to 2.4 gigahertz of internet connection speed. So a lot of like modern day internet is 5G, and I've like run into a lot of issues with that. So just fair warning if you want to try and do this. That's like a common issue. Yeah, so the idea is once they connect to Wi-Fi, they send all the data to the air gradient dashboard. And once the youth like completed this process, they took it home, and they were supposed to. I think am I working? Yeah. Okay, sorry. It got like quieter. Anyway, they were supposed to take it home, and then they were supposed to keep it plugged in for the rest of the summer program. Most of the kids did not do that. You know, it's hard to get kids to do this sometimes. And we did have a few kids that did actually plug in their monitors, and I'll like show you the results of that in a moment. But before I do that, I'm going to talk about the housing. So the housing was actually like electrical conduit boxes. And I'm going to grab one out of my bag really quick. Just be patient with me. I should have taken this out. All right. So here's the one that I made. It's like an electrical conduit box, and I'm pretty proud it was my idea to do that. Yeah. So inside of here you have the different components, and it's actually like stuck on one side here. So I hope I can take it out. Okay. There you go. All right, so here's the PM205 sensor here. This is the Wi-Fi connection. This is like where you put the power source in right here. And that's also like where you plug in the cord to put the code onto it. And then this is the temperature and humidity sensor. Yeah, so this goes into here. And there's actually like holes on the end here that are supposed to help like the airflow get into the sensor box. And the kids actually painted these white to help reduce the temperature inside of them because they are meant to go outside. Preferably not in a place that's like in direct, like, well, not where the like rain's going to hit them directly, but they were designed to go outside. So, you can see in the picture they're drilling the holes for the airflow, and then they're also painting them, which was by far the most like favorite activity for all the kids. They got really creative with them. My favorite one was this kid painted theirs like a cow print, and then they just like wrote moo on it, and I thought that was cute. All right, so here is some of the data that was sent to our database. You can see that we didn't have very many kids that actually like plugged in their monitor. Sometimes it also was a problem that the kids didn't have the right type of internet, which was like more often than not one of the biggest issues. These don't run off of like hotspots, and some of the kids only have like cellular data at home, so that was a limiting factor. But my air quality monitor is actually on here, and I had it plugged in for a long time actually. And you can like see some of the data. The like up and downs are probably related to like day and night, because the air quality is different in the daytime and the nighttime. But also there's like changes because I was cooking. I don't smoke, so that's not going to be like a factor here. But yeah, I've always had a gas stove. Unfortunately, like when you rent in Cincinnati, that's mostly where you're going to have. So yeah, there is that. Currently, we're trying to get our air quality monitors onto the air gradient dashboard. And it looks like this. This is just a screenshot that I got from the internet. Actually, this is not like from our monitors, but we're in the process of trying to get all of our monitors to send to this dashboard, which, like I said, is like an issue with the internet type. All right, like I mentioned before, we collected a bunch of data from the community members and also the youth, and all of that data went onto the air quality in Greater Cincinnati dashboard, which is here. And I hope that I can get it to show. Okay, yeah, here it is. So this was created by our partner, which is Data Bloom, and they like worked with me a little bit, but most of the credit goes to them. What's really cool, well, first of all, this dashboard covers the time period that we were collecting data. So it goes from March 2024 to August 2024. So it's not meant to be like a real-time dashboard to reference. But what's unique about this one is that you can actually use it to compare different neighborhoods. You can like select a certain period of time and compare, say, like in our city, a really like affluent neighborhood is Oakley. You can compare Oakley to a less affluent neighborhood like Lower Price Hill, and you can like see the huge differences in air quality there. So it's really neat in that way. Yeah, you just go here and you like select certain time periods. It takes a while to load, so I'm not like going to do that right now because there's so much data on there, and we use a free server, so it's not very fast. And I wish that we had a better server, to be honest, but it like costs a lot of money. So, and I think that is it for my piece. Thank you.
Well, hi, everybody. Oh, I need to get closer, don't I? This was so great for everybody to hear, because part of what's going on here is that these are the science people and they know how to do mapping and things. I'm a lawyer, so I do words. So it's really, really important for us to understand why we need this data. You heard from them, you know, the importance of communities understanding this. You heard from them the importance of understanding why this has happened with redlining. I hate to do this to you because you're in my city, right? But they were talking about some of the things that are impacting Cincinnati. And so to give you some grounding in where you're at, and sorry, you got to go breathe this in a minute, but the city of Cleveland, unfortunately, was the 9th worst for ozone in 2025. So we really need to get on that and fix it, obviously. Recently, the state of Ohio's EPA decided to try to pull us out of non-attainment. So we are not in attainment right now with our ozone standards. And so what they've tried to do is use these exceptional events. And those were the wildfires that they talked about. So Clevelanders also impacted very much by these wildfires. And if they're successful, which I think they will under the current federal administration, that means we go back into attainment and have lower standards. And they're more stringent, right, when you're in non-attainment. And the problem with this, right, their exceptional events are those wildfires. So yes, maybe that makes sense right now, but we're going to see this increase, right, because of climate change. And so if we're in non-attainment, we at least have more stringent standards. And these wildfires are going to suddenly become not exceptional anymore, right? So if we want to protect Clevelanders' health, we really need to stay aware of this. And those can't be exceptional if they're happening constantly throughout the summer. So that's problematic. They also showed you a redlining map. We have one here for the city of Cleveland, and we talk about this at the beginning of our class for the Environmental Law Clinic. And unfortunately, you can take the redlining map for the city of Cleveland, and then you can take an environmental justice map to show our disadvantaged neighborhoods. It's almost completely identical. So that's kind of what we're living in, right? So what do we need this data for? Who uses it, right? So you've got to ground any kind of environmental health protection based upon the way the EPA works in scientific evidence. So we do need this rigorous data, right? It's important that we have really, really, important for us to have scientific readings that are, we can rely on, right? This allows our regulators, our legislators to kind of balance these protections with other factors, right? Physicians use this, right? Scientists use this, researchers use this, administration, legislators, all these folks, and community. I'm sorry, I edited this slide, but we have the wrong version. So community members are super important for exactly what we're talking about today. Physicians and I'll talk about this a little bit later, they're using this, researchers are using this, and it's problematic when we have some attacks, which is what we're going to talk about. So this community air monitoring data is so critical, and we're seeing attacks not only here in Ohio, but across the country. So to ground us, right, the EPA's mission, right, is to protect human health in the environment. These are just a quick list, and Chris is going to go into some of these a little bit more. But we've had all of these happen since the Trump administration took office, and this is just a very short 4 bullet points, right? So we've seen weakened standards. They're trying to delay the shift away from super pollutants. They're no longer considering the economic benefit of reducing health impacts, which is just crazy, right? If you want to have a really good conversation with someone that actually doesn't care about the environment, you can put it in monetary terms, right? But we're no longer doing that. And then, of course, the endangerment finding, which I'm sure many of you heard of, but Chris is going to tackle that in a little bit. So I just want to also highlight these things that are additional components of EPA's mission. They're supposed to use the best scientific data, which we need. They're supposed to look at chemicals in the marketplace for safety. And unfortunately, the way we do things under our laws here is we wait for something to go wrong, and then we try and fix it. So that's after it's already impacted people's health. I know I'm a real uplifting one, right? So these are the attacks we're seeing on community air monitoring data. So very specific. There are plenty of other things that are being attacked right now, obviously, but these are things that are happening right here in the Midwest and then down in Louisiana. So Kentucky passed House Bill 137, and all of these ban community air monitoring data from being used for enforcement purposes. That number 1 takes out community air monitoring. I can't go now as a citizen and try and use my data that I've collected for a citizen suit against a polluter. I can't, our local government, which I know we have some local government officials, you can't use data that isn't an EPA grade monitor, which costs $50,000, $40,000 to $50,000, instead of our little monitors, right? This is a purple air monitor, which I'll show you some maps of, very similar to the monitors they were showing. This is $250. That's still expensive for the average person. But it's cheaper than $50,000, right? So you can no longer use data that is coming from this in these, 3 states. West Virginia just advanced one of these that didn't actually pass it, so that's good. But Louisiana and Ohio, we'll talk more about those in a minute. But this is not good, right? And we see copycat legislation like this that is really going to endanger people's health. So hopefully it's limited to these states, and hopefully some of these get overturned. So again, this is a map. This one's the map of the EPA grade sensors. This is Air Now, which you can go to look at EPA grade monitors and determine where they're at right now. I clearly picked a good day, right? This was clearly not the wildfire days. But you can see, and the reason I have this on here is because you can see, look at these gaps, right? Findlay and Sandusky got nothing. Mansfield's got nothing, right? Marion, you know, there's some close to there, but the NDs are not working right then. So that's what those NDs are. Chillicothe, Lancaster, you can see all of these, right? This is a purple air monitoring map. So all these things go onto a public map that you can look up. It is real-time data. You can see we've got some problems that are some orange. When the wildfires were coming through, both Cincinnati and across the state, these were orange, purple, and red. This was bad, right? If you had asthma, you should stay in your house and keep your windows closed. And so we really need these alerts. And people put these in their backyard because they're worried about the health of their children. They're worried about their own health. They have heart problems already. They have asthma. So this is a health issue, right? We talk about the environment, but these are environmental health issues. So I just think it's important to see this. And while we still do have some gaps, I could go put one of these up wherever I wanted and we'd have more data. So we want to get you guys participating because I know we've been talking at you a lot. So have you guys seen attacks on the use of data in your communities or states? And why do you think this is happening? Any takers? All right, I guess we got no Virginians and or West Virginians. I'm just talking up here. But anyway, you saw some of these that are happening right now, okay? So keep thinking about that. We'll circle back at the end of the presentation. This, I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I have a question.
Sure.
It's not me. So
Oh.
I think there's like the.
Hey, Cassie, hold on.
Okay, sorry. So there's this idea of attacks from oftentimes our conservative state legislators. But like even here locally, I think there is some distrust of organizations, the data that they're put forth, even if they're public organizations. For example, I feel like there's some distrust of the data from the sewer system. And in the Lower Lake issue, the Shaker Heights. So I mean, I think there is this issue of like, does the community trust the data? And that's why community data is also needed. But I don't know if you could speak to that. So I think it's a twofold thing.
Yeah, a lot of folks are just skeptical of everything the government does, and sometimes it's for very good reason. So some of those different pieces of data, I don't know what type of monitor they're using. So it's hard to say whether that is, legitimate verifiable data. But some people question whether community air monitors are legitimate too. But I can tell you that there are monitors that are, if you look at these maps, some of these monitors, right, that you see are very close to some of these AirNow EPA grade monitors. And when you have these, my experience, they track very, very well. So you can compare that data to make sure that this is actually working. I also want to give a shout out to the city of Cleveland because they've got a really great map that you guys can go on. They actually worked with Case Western's engineering department here and built their own monitors. And they were more expensive than these, but way less expensive than $50,000. But I will talk a little bit more, as I said, we're having some attacks on community data, and that actually is going to impact the great work they've done because those are not EPA grade monitors, right? So they're not even going to be able to use their own data to do enforcement in the city and across Tioga County. But it's an amazing thing. If you haven't checked it out, you should definitely go look up their map. And it is not real time. It's not real time, but you can get the data on the back end later, right? Okay, thanks, Emma. So again, we'll talk about more about, thanks, Cassie, for that question. So as I mentioned, we've got these attacks that are happening. I'm just going to give you two snippets of what our clinic is doing to try to help with this. The first is the Louisiana law. There is a lawsuit currently with Rise St. James and a number of other folks and organizations versus the state of Louisiana. Louisiana passed this law that not only bans the use of data, community data, for enforcement, it also fines you if you distribute it. So you can't even distribute your community air data or you get fines. So this obviously is a problem. It's an environmental health problem. It is a First Amendment problem. And the law is written pretty poorly. So it's kind of unclear who would be subjected to these fines. So we represented American Thoracic Society, and we had, it was an Amici brief. We also partnered with, I hope I get this right, the Association for Advanced Participatory Science, and they help folks do community air monitoring. So it's really, really critical for them, obviously, doing this data, that this law doesn't stand because they can't do this air monitoring, and they know the importance of this stuff, right? Their folks in their communities are suffering from this air pollution, and now they can't even use their data to do something about it. So as I said, we were with American Thoracic Society, our students, which was really great, and our fellow got to write an Amici brief and submit it to the court in support of Rise St. James. who, by the way, is an incredible organization. They've done all kinds of things to try to tackle the oil situation down in Louisiana. They're just a wonderful organization. So give them a lot of credit, right? Our client is a society of pulmonologists, right? So they are the ones looking at the data, trying to figure out what health risks exist, and then hoping someone will listen to them so they can fix those, right? And the question here is, can they even release their data? If they're using it for their research, are they going to get in trouble and get fined if they release a paper that used the data? We don't know, because it's a poorly written statute. But what we don't need is our researchers, our doctors, and our health experts to be getting fined like thousands of dollars for releasing research papers. So that's why American Thoracic Society got involved. And so we combined forces with participatory science to make sure we could really explain why community air monitoring was necessary and why this would impact the health of residents. Our second lawsuit, we are lucky to represent, along with Chris, Ohio Environmental Council, as well as Sierra Club, in a lawsuit against the state of Ohio, as well as our partners. Fair Shake is representing Sobe Concerned Citizens over in Youngstown, as well as Freshwater Accountability Project. And then we also have an individual in this lawsuit who is based in Cincinnati. So I don't know if you know about this, but she's been fighting steel mills and emissions in her backyard. She's a fence line. She backs up to the steel mill, and she's had all kinds of problems with her air. And she has filed lawsuits against these multiple times. This, and I'm not going to go into too much detail unless you're really interested in con law, but essentially the state of Ohio passed a law as part of the budget bill that bans community air monitoring data and bans or pulls out this piece called the air nuisance rule that allows us as Ohioans to bring citizen suits, which is us acting to enforce these laws in Ohio, right? So what they did is put this into the budget bill. And as you can imagine, a budget bill is supposed to have impacts on money and fiscal policy, right? And so these were substantive provisions that were kind of slipped in there, and nobody really knew they were happening. Even our great advocacy organization kind of like found out last minute. So there was no ability to testify on this. There was no ability for organizations to fight back to get people like us who care about health protections to comment on this. So this is horrible, right? And so we've filed a lawsuit under what's called the single subject rule, which requires bills in the legislature, to be one subject. And since this has nothing to do with fiscal policy, it shouldn't have been included. It's substantive, right? And I mentioned those $50,000 monitors. That's all we would have now to enforce air quality. You, me, the cities, nobody can use their air data unless it is an EPA grade monitor. And you saw that map. So this does not help our fence line communities. This does not help certain areas of the state at all. So we're kind of left without this. So we've finished briefing, and so we're just waiting on a decision, and Chris is going to go into more detail around that. But these are the attacks we're seeing. So it's really important that we fight back, and it's not just important that we fight back in the courtroom. It's important that we all make our voices heard. It's very possible that we win our lawsuit and this gets pulled out of the legislation. However, they could just go back and file, submit it again. If they do that, though, it should be in its own bill so we can all comment on it, right? So that's what's really important here in Ohio. And I'll pass it on to Chris. Oof. Just get wiped out there.
What are we using to advance us? All right. Can you all hear me? Mike's a little far away. Okay. Well, following up the three of them is going to be a little bit difficult, but I know we have at least two attorneys in the room. Do we have how many attorneys do we have in the room? Is it just the two of you? Okay, good to know. Any law students? Okay, well, it's mostly because we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into the lawsuit to give you all a little bit of a taste of like the very direct impacts that we're kind of naming out of the lawsuit, and so it just gives me an idea of whether or not people are going to understand how I should approach explaining the purpose of a complaint. Okay, so we're going to dive a little bit deeper into House Bill 96, the appeal that we're doing, and the plaintiffs and their community air monitoring efforts. You heard from Sydney and Tiffany, all of the work that they're doing, and we've got another example that's very similar, and it's going to end up connecting to data centers, which is also the issue that I think everyone keeps hearing about all the time, every day lately. So what we have on the screen here is actually, this is, if when you file a lawsuit, you file a complaint against another party, in this case, the state of Ohio, and in that complaint, you're alleging a bunch of facts of like the impacts of whatever the situation is to the parties involved. In this case, Ohio Environmental Council and our members that are impacted, as well as the other parties that Randy mentioned just a little bit ago. And these are some of the facts from the complaint that I've highlighted here to kind of tease out, these real impacts of banning community air monitoring, of banning that air nuisance provision that Randy mentioned. So, we talked about the cost of these air monitors. Two of our OEC members have been building out an air monitoring network in Licking County near New Albany, in Granville, and Newark, because down in central Ohio, there's been this proposal to build a giant Intel chip manufacturing plant, and now central Ohio is also getting a ton of proposed data centers. Now, all of those projects are going to have different proposals for how they're going to get their energy, how they're going to use water, what their various air pollutant impacts are going to be. They're all going through various permitting processes. And this group of folks in the area were like, well, if all of that build out is going to come into our community, we may or may not be able to stop it if they think that it should be stopped. But what we can do as a community is start filling in the gaps on air quality monitoring data and really get a baseline of the ambient air quality before all of these companies show up. And then after the companies show up, they can be monitoring to see how's the air quality changing, to inform whether or not, these companies that are coming in, maybe they've made certain commitments about what's going on. They can be doing kind of a fill in the gaps air quality monitoring from their community that informs if things are changing differently than maybe the company's committed to, or if there's gaps from where these other, super expensive US EPA monitors aren't. That was their theory. And so they've been building out this network of monitors that at this point has costed them over $7,000. They're working with some various researchers in the central Ohio area that are connected with like OSU and such that have built a really cheap monitor that then is being distributed out through the community, connects into a network. So, we got cost is $7,000, $185 per monitor. And if they had to purchase the US EPA monitors, those would have cost $50,000 each. You can't even get one for the cost of $7,000. And so they've been installing these monitors to gather that baseline data. And so both of them you see over here in paragraph 57, it's, revoking their ability to use community air monitoring data will prevent them from seeking enforcement action if the data shows that might be necessary. Again, they're setting up this data to establish a baseline, but that also, like, if the data ended up showing there's a real problem, they would want to go to, say, the Ohio EPA, or maybe they would want to file an air nuisance claim, any of those options that are available to them. But because of the law that was passed through the budget bill, they would not be able to use that data in their enforcement action. The Ohio EPA, if they wanted to enforce, would not be able to use that data in enforcement action. Maybe the local government, they wanted to pursue an enforcement action, wouldn't be able to use that data. So this is their current map. For those of you who know the central Ohio area, you've got Columbus down here in the left. You've got some monitors in the Columbus area, but most of their monitors are out in Licking County to the east, past New Albany on the way to Newark. The Intel plant, if I remember correctly, is being proposed kind of like east of New Albany there in the center. There are various data centers being proposed in that area as well. And now over the past few years, there are data centers kind of being proposed all around Columbus. There are some over in Hilliard. They're being proposed in a lot of different places. And so, when we're thinking about this massive build out of these hyperscale data centers, one of the things that we're constantly thinking about is how do we ensure that we're having transparent data? How do we ensure that we're collecting data about what these impacts might be if this build out occurs? But the website, you can actually pull this website up. This is real-time data from what I understand. So if you were to go to, I believe the website is just simpleaq.com, or maybe .org, not entirely certain, you would be able to see the real-time air data from all of these monitors. So then also, we have other, similar impacts noted from other communities across the state in our lawsuit. So just a few other examples of, Randy mentioned so be concerned citizens in Youngstown. You've got folks that were collecting data relating to various industrial facilities in the region, people's concerns from how that impacts their asthma, collecting that data because they felt like there were gaps in the US EPA monitoring data. And then on the right side here, Randy mentioned Ms. Ballinger, who's been fighting down in Southwest Ohio for a long time, and the air nuisance rule, which we could do a whole session on the history of the air nuisance rule and the attacks on it, but essentially Ohio has had an air nuisance rule in its state implementation plan to the US EPA for about 50 years. But about a decade ago, during the first Trump administration, there were some companies that were trying to get the US EPA and the Ohio EPA to remove that that component from Ohio's plan. It's been ping-ponging through the courts. 2 days before the Biden administration left office, they actually reinstated the air nuisance rule. And then since it was reinstated back at the beginning of 2025, we've had renewed attempts to remove it, including this budget bill provision that did pass through the Ohio legislature. And one of the reasons why we were kind of connecting these two issues is because it's a two-pronged approach. It's eliminate this data that might show things where there are gaps. Also eliminate a method to use that data to pursue enforcement against polluting industries. So I'm going to talk about a few other examples of data use that we also find important at the OEC, and there are various different ways that things occur. So in this space, so I work often at the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, where OEC is intervening in utility cases such as First Energies, which is the major utility up in this area, AEP down in Central Ohio. And in the First Energy case a few years ago, we submitted this report called a grid disparity analysis. We worked with the Interstate Renewable Energy Council, one of their staff members. They acted as an expert before the Public Utilities Commission. And one of the major conclusions that came out of this report had to do with essentially some of the metrics that utilities were using to measure reliability of the grid was missing kind of very acute impacts. So essentially you would have this one metric that, I'm going to remember the acronym correctly, is something like customers experiencing something disruptions. I'm not an engineer, so I don't know all of these terms by heart, but essentially it would show that like you might have a metric that shows generally this area doesn't see disruptions, but then other metrics would show that community is experiencing significant long disruptions. However, those metrics weren't required to be reported to the Public Utilities Commission, so it was kind of a missing gap in the data. And so we were submitting this report, these disparities, and there were various economic and racial factors that were also kind of co-located across this analysis. And there have been multiple times where you'll have parties in these cases that'll be like, we don't think that data should be in there. We don't think it's relevant. We don't think this data about disparities in how the grid works is relevant to the Public Utilities Commission, which is regulating how the grid works. Fortunately, we were able to get the data in, but it's just kind of another example of how these like little attacks on data occur where people don't want certain information in certain decision-making locations, venues. So another question. Well, this is kind of returning to the question that we asked earlier, but once again, I mean, we're giving more examples now of like where we're seeing attacks on the use of data and science in decision-making. Does anyone else have any examples that they want to share?
Yeah, I think it should be. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think it should be noted that a lot of the federal grants that went to try to support a lot of these CDOs in developing air monitoring programs and other data collection that would have been really useful for you all have since been terminated. I know several of those were in Louisiana, Mississippi area, and so just the impact of federal grant terminations, I know, has had a huge impact on attacking the underlying data and science collection.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point because you actually, we may have had grants going to organizations that actually had sufficient funding to buy $50,000 monitors. So you've got out of one mouth, you've got people saying, hey, you got to use the US EPA grade data, but we're also not going to fund you to get that data. So then there's just no data. It's a great example. Oh, we got another one.
I was just gonna say, I think it is maybe not, for example, a lot of DEI data has been traced and pulled. Even here at Case, there used to be a diversity and equity report that was released annually. And now the only place you can find it is the Internet Archive. Or what's it called? Basically, the external places that will keep data or keep records of internet websites. So, like, there is no place that you can find the demographic, racial makeup of the university for faculty, students, and staff. So that would impact if we are regressing or progressing. We don't know because there's no data. I think that this erasure of that data is also critical for any efforts to evaluate progress on those fronts.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, I mean, somebody mentioned EJ screen earlier, and the EJ screen getting deleted. Like, that's another really good example. Fortunately, I think there are institutions, that save that data. But once again, I mean, US EPA was updating that data regularly and maintaining it from a national perspective. And that do you know if the folks that are actually holding on to it, are they even trying to update it, or is it just a snapshot?
I think it is just snapshot.
Just a snapshot. Yeah, so it's not even being updated, so that it's gonna degrade in its quality pretty quickly.
And I will just add, there's our company, I think, great, but called Green Link Equity Maps, and it's not exactly like EJ Screen because you have to pick like 2 factors and you can compare it. And it costs money, so that's unfortunate. But there are some types of things that you can use to try to mock the great things that we could find out on EJ Screen, but throw that in.
But it's like proprietary.
Yes, you have to pay for it, and yeah.
You not just pay for it, but you don't know necessarily how they're calculating.
Yeah, they are quite helpful if you have them. We have a subscription for a year, so, but you're right, which is problematic.
Oh, great.
In Indiana, in this last legislative session, they could be prohibition for all cities to collect utility data. We had only in one city that was collecting large load customers' data for energy and water usage. They didn't want any other cities to do that. So, and this was really important benchmarking that you can use to like that best practices with the data septic and the not want that. You can share it voluntarily, but the data cost ordinance that has just a very qualifying structure that was based in. So unfortunately, we're going to have to do a voluntary program, which is still meaningful, but it's not the same as a unenforced program.
Yeah, that's an excellent example. I'm loving this. This is great. Well, it's not great that there are this many examples, let's be clear.
About how these attacks on they all fall, I guess, on clean air attacks to the greenhouse gas emissions, how that fits in with just general data collection.
Yeah.
And then just a point about federal data. That's been a lot of rescue efforts, including some that are not proprietary. One to look at is edgy. There's a network now of groups that try to say all data that's been lost.
All right. So yes, what about the repeal of the endangerment finding? So how many people are familiar with the basics of the endangerment finding? Okay, we got a good number of hands. So the endangerment finding back in 2009 was a decision by the US EPA to find that greenhouse gases, so those 6 pollutants, are regulated pollutants under the Clean Air Act. And what that means is then the authority of the US EPA under the Clean Air Act views those as pollutants, and then you can pass certain regulations based on that determination. One of the key things that I think is really important to highlight about the endangerment finding and the current effort to repeal the endangerment finding by the Trump administration is that ultimately the endangerment finding at its core is not a regulation. It is just a scientific conclusion of the agency upon which the agency can then base its regulations. And they're trying to paint it as it is a regulation, a far sweeping regulation that just like undermines all of our economy and all this stuff. It's a lot of hyperbole. But ultimately, it's really an attack on, it's just a straight attack on science. It is saying that the US EPA back in 2009 and all of these scientists and all of the consensus of science around greenhouse gas emissions, it's not an air pollutant. That's what they're trying to claim. And so therefore, we don't have to pass regulations. We can actually repeal all of our regulations that are based on it. But ultimately, from my perspective as an attorney, it's like, okay, so you have the endangerment finding that says that greenhouse gas emissions cause climate change, are air pollutants, cause these various public health and environmental impacts. What, we might disagree with the approach, but a more reasonable approach from an administration might be, well, yes, the greenhouse gas endangerment finding is a real thing, but we're going to change the regulations because we think the regulations should be different. They're going at the actual scientific underpinning. And one of the impacts that's going to come from this is once this is fully repealed, there's a whole bunch of monitoring and data requirements that stem from having greenhouse gas emissions listed as air pollutants that will likely disappear or become voluntary. And so then once again, we're going to see gaps in data occur for greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. And it'll then turn to states and local governments to then hopefully fill in those gaps until we have a different administration that then probably reverses this again. So there will be lots of litigation over this issue. There have been plenty of lawsuits already filed. I'm sure there will be more. It's going to be a long fight to the U.S. Supreme Court on this issue. So we'll just say pay attention to this one because it's going to be really important, and it's a very kind of novel issue being presented to the U.S. Supreme Court when it comes to the ultimate kind of scientific conclusion versus regulation question. And so then now let's talk about data centers. I kind of previewed that a little bit earlier. Up on the screen, I have kind of the approach that the OEC is taking to data centers. And as these get built out, specifically the hyperscale data center question is what we're talking about. But I'm bringing this up because this is, as everyone in this room I'm sure is aware, we're seeing giant proposals for an immense amount of construction of these data centers that are widely varying in their water use, their energy use, the form of energy that they're going to use to produce, to run their facilities. You've got facilities that are proposing natural gas fuel cell technology. You've got companies that are proposing to use nuclear. You've got companies that are proposing to use traditional natural gas. Some are running on diesel generators. It's all across the board as to what they're using, which means that every single one of these is going to require kind of a very unique monitoring approach and permit approach for like permitting what their air pollution can be, what their water pollution can be. And so when we're thinking about this big question of, a proposed build out and increase in electric use that is almost unprecedented in this country, we should be thinking about what data do we need on the front end? What data do we need on the back end? If these do get built, how are we ensuring that they're staying compliant with their permits? But also, there's only so much that regulators can do. What is the role of the community? What is the role of local governments to fill in those gaps and protect their residents from unforeseen impacts, depending on what these facilities may be proposing for their power source and their water use. And so I'm not going to go into the details of these. These are perspectives here. Happy to answer questions if people have. But this is kind of just our snapshot of our approach. But what I want to note is, pillar one, increase industry transparency as a big one, because we need data, transparent data. We need rules in place to protect communities so that they know what is changing with their air quality, if anything. So ultimately, what you might be kind of seeing is that, like, at this point, I would call data kind of a political football, and science is a political football that's being used to, kind of swing things in favor of in different directions, depending on the issue. So, we're seeing the sneaky removal of community air monitoring data through the budget bill, House Bill 96. But then on the other hand, we are actually seeing at the state level in Ohio some comprehensive analysis legislation that is saying, hey, let's take a second, let's take a look at all of these issues. Let's gather all of that data together on the potential impacts of data centers. There's a piece of legislation, HB 646, that is moving through the State House. I believe it has passed in the House. and is intended to create a data center study commission to gather a ton of information. Now, how that commission works, how the study is put together is going to, devil will be in the details as to how that works, but that is a good sign that at least you've got legislators realizing the scale of something like data centers and saying, let's get as much information as possible. Also, importantly, for all of those of you in this room, there will be opportunities for people to go testify with their expertise or their role as a community member at these this commission if it does get through the Senate and it gets stood up. And so I would recommend everyone think about how you might want to be presenting your perspective on data centers at those commission hearings when they actually occur. But then there's other legislation moving as well. There's a piece of legislation that would ban certain types of non-disclosure agreements between data centers and local governments. I know folks that work for local governments may have opinions on the details of what that bill says, but ultimately from our perspective, there at least needs to be a conversation about ensuring that data centers can't hide what's going on. So that legislation is also moving. And since I wrote this slide, this is only a tiny snapshot of all of the data center legislation that's moving at the Ohio State House on both on kind of multiple sides of the issue. It's not like both sides. It's like there's like probably as many legislators are there at the Ohio General Assembly. You've probably got that many different perspectives on data centers at the moment. It's a very live issue. But the data question is really key here because if we're going to be removing opportunities for data to play a role in enforcement, certain protections may not matter if you don't have the data to show that there's a problem. So kind of just returning back to that simple AQ map, I really want to kind of close us as we move into discussion to just really ground us in like who is actually impacted by the loss of data, the loss of the opportunities to enforce using that data. Ultimately, it's the people that want to protect their communities. It's, local folks who live in a community and want to know what's going on in their community, whether it's down in Cincinnati with the work that Groundwork's doing, or the work that folks are doing in the Central Ohio area, or communities like Cleveland that are putting up air quality monitors throughout their city. That's what matters. And so when you see these attacks on data to say, oh, don't use this type of data, I ultimately, someone might make the argument, oh, is the data less credible? Is it less scientifically accurate? Isn't there a reason why we should use the US EPA data? And my answer to that is, every level of data you can assess on its own merits. So yes, the US EPA data has a scientific rigor level that exists for a reason. That doesn't mean that other data can't be filling in the gaps, and then also take a look at its actual credibility level, and then you base your decisions accordingly based on what you know about the quality of that data. But that doesn't mean the data is useless. So I think you all have one last slide.
Let me touch on. To leave on a little bit more of a positive note, we did get additional funding to continue our air quality program. We're actually starting again next week. So we will be training 50 more residents in the Cincinnati area on air pollution hazard training. They'll be building their own monitors. We'll do that mobile air quality activity, and then we'll be building another pollinator garden in Lower Priceville. So that's just something exciting. We're kind of using the same model that we've used previously. And then this data collected will actually be in partnership with Data Bloom, which they will kind of take that data and make it into a more digestible, visual collection that people can view online. Hopefully we can use that to impact some policy in Cincinnati too. But yeah, we're just still continuing to do the hard work that we can do with the funding that we have and that we're able to secure so far. And this is a little bit exciting because we could still continue this wonderful program and hopefully continue doing it for more summers. But yeah, 50 new residents will be educated in air quality, and just a little something to be excited about. So yeah, questions and discussion time. I don't know if anyone has, we'll probably just all go sit over here, but
yeah, I actually have one question coming in on the app.
Oh, right.
So, what options are there outside of litigation approaches to fight back on attacks on data? And you guys get ready here now.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah, obviously litigation is one approach. And that's, lawyers sometimes our brain goes first to how can we litigate this issue? But ultimately, the power of organizing communities to engage with their decision makers is a really difficult thing to do, but really important. And what I mean by that is, that's finding a local organization that is paying attention to the issue that you care about. Maybe it's groundwork in Cincinnati, maybe it's a statewide organization like OEC, whoever it might be, and join in collective efforts to change policy back, to engage with decision makers at the state house, at your local government. I mean, sometimes don't underestimate the power of your local elected officials to then sway and engage things upward. You bring an issue to your city council member, to your mayor, and ask them to, go to the state house for you and advocate on an issue. There's those approaches. I know it can seem very difficult, but ultimately we are trying to kind of organize in our communities, show up, use that power in different places. Then these laws will stay on the books. So yes, like litigation is one approach, but ultimately, as Randy said, the legal theory we're working under, if we're successful, the law will be repealed. But ultimately, the legislature then could come back and propose a similar law, which then means we need lots of people to show up and say, okay, here's why we don't like this policy, which means we need people in the room at committee hearings.
Just to add on to that really quick, we talk in our clinic, we don't just talk about litigation, we talk about movement lawyering. And that means whatever client comes to you, you have to think about a holistic approach to fix their problem. So, and whatever their goal is, that's what we do, right? So we have a lot of those conversations in the clinic. And just one other piece that you mentioned, local community. I would encourage everybody, just communities need to organize to protect each other, right? It's one thing to go to the state house and do that, and that's an important component, but to organize to protect each other. And just a quick plug, we've been working with the Cleveland Air Quality Coalition, and they have formed to do this stuff. So if anybody's in Cleveland wants to get involved, you definitely should. And one of the things they've organized around now, going back to legislation, is City of Cleveland has a cumulative impacts ordinance that's been introduced at City Council. And what a cumulative impacts ordinance would be would take all the pollution into account, instead of just taking one smokestack into account. And that's to protect our environmental justice neighborhoods, because they've been put upon over and over and over, and we sacrifice them. So that's also, local stuff, but also just protecting your neighbors.
Okay, we only have about 6 minutes left, but we'll try to get through the last next.
Thank you all. That was great. And to me, you said something that I really liked was something like we should stop collecting data on communities, start collecting with them.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really good. Thank you for that. My question too was, with EPA monitors being the only place we can get data from at a certain point, Randy, I think you shared a map where there was bunch that weren't active. So as they break, as they stop working, is the current administration going to be like, no, we're not funding more, so we just get less and less and less and less data?
So I think they're still being monitored, and they're still doing as it happens. I mean, I know like the city's map, right? Like if something's not working, you pull it off because you don't want people to get the wrong data.
Yeah.
The same thing is true of those. Right now, we haven't seen any like financing or funds pulled back from the state level. And you have to remember, people are in their jobs to do that job, right? We're very lucky to have dedicated staff at city government at the EPA level. So sometimes we need to help them, a little more slyly when we have attacks on that stuff. So I haven't seen anything like that yet, but it certainly could be a possibility, unfortunately.
Just obviously concerned. You need to find
Absolutely.
everything. Like we're just gonna keep cutting.
Yeah.
Any data would be helpful, not just the EPA, when it comes to running grants or decision makers for, for a grant, can we use any data, or, if there could be some descriptive, and I see that like people just EPA data more and any other data. So what are your opinions on that? Right.
I don't want to keep talking, but if anyone has an opinion, let me know. Funders, my experience with funders, they get this, they understand there's gaps, so I don't think they're going to care if you, in fact, they might encourage you, right? Because they want you to protect fence line communities. So I haven't seen anything now. If you're applying to federal grants,
Yeah, I think I'm not a part of the grant writing process in my organization, but I think it really depends on where you're getting the grant from. Yeah, like federal grants might be a little bit more difficult. I mean, I know we've had to deal with like changing even the verbiage of like, we used to call ourselves climate, or we do call ourselves climate safe neighborhoods, but we've transitioned to community, safe neighborhoods, just like that verbiage with federal funding. So I think it really would depend on what you're applying to, but yeah, like what you were saying, like, I think a lot of people that the people offering the grants they're in it, like they know what the money wants to be used for. So I think any data collected, it's useful to include in there.
This is an earlier point about approaches you take. Eagle with one. I think we didn't explicitly mention other. Community was mentioned, organizing. But related to that is boycotting. Possible. Sometimes it may be challenging to go after a particular location. There's a woven into a network. There's also public shaming. So let's not forget there's a variety of approaches, and I'm sure other members have other ideas.
Yeah, I think this is a really excellent point. One of the things that I think often gets missed in trying to pursue environmental progress or progress of any sort is that multiplicity of tactics are a good thing, and not every organization is going to use every tactic. But I think it's important for organizations that are using different tactics or groups or whoever to be in conversation with each other, because they can be complementary in a lot of really important ways. But ultimately, the important thing is to be strategic and think through for different situations, which tactic is going to have the sort of impacts that your community, your organization is looking for. I'm thinking about, sometimes in Ohio, I mean, I can speak for Ohio's perspective, is local governments are often reticent to pursue litigation over certain issues because they are, and to be clear, I've heard this from local governments, they're reticent to pursue litigation or pass certain ordinances on certain issues because they're worried about state preemption at the Ohio General Assembly that will just pass a law that then makes what they were trying to do useless. And so that means local governments have to think a little bit more creatively about how they pursue their approach. But there are also some local governments that will just say, you know what, we're going to be bold. We know that the General Assembly may try to preempt us, and so we're gonna sue. We're gonna pass this ordinance. We're gonna see what happens. But then if they try to preempt us or whatever, that sort of public shaming narrative can come in, where it's like you can then say, like, look, we were trying to do this to protect our community. Lawmakers at the State House are doing the exact opposite.
Just a really quick add-on, the data center issue, like Chris was talking about, there are actually folks gathering signatures to put it on the ballot for referendum. So if you're an Ohioan and are upset about that, find somebody where you can go ahead and sign on.
And a little tidbit that I wanted to add, I think it's working. A lot, like Tiffany mentioned, like with our data collection, like a lot of the air quality data that the community members collect is not readable, or we don't like necessarily use it directly for policy. We haven't collected, but a big reason why we do these programs is to educate. So educate these community members so they can go out and advocate and go to their our policymakers and say, we know what this is, like what air quality is and the endangerment that it's causing to our community. So education is kind of like the biggest reason why we do these programs, regardless if the data collected is actually utilized in any policy changes or anything. It starts by educating the community members, getting them to know what's going on so they can be in those rooms and go advocate for themselves.
If I make this comment, that's exactly what I wanted to say. It is and empowering them to be able to go and speak to. Having obviously the legal expertise is important, but I cannot emphasize enough the importance of collaboration to go and be with a nonprofit that understands the topic, that understands the language, that I can be a bill, that I can help you, and for you to be able to either go in person, talk to the legislators, or to write a letter, or to make a phone call. Critical. It's amazing the work that you do, because the legislators are not just story of them. They actually educated them.
Howard. We're out of time, but I don't know if speakers are willing to stick around for, if people have additional questions they want to ask afterward.
I think the next panels are till 11.
Yeah, there's a break.
We have a
If
little
people
bit
want to stick around. If you guys want me to take another question, I can.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, I know we have a leave here.
Yeah, but if people step out, we won't be affected.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming.
Randy will be affected, but I will be.
Thank you all. I just have a really quick question about the data of the outcome of like initiatives that you're doing. For example, the training. How does that, what outcomes is that? Have you been measuring the outcomes in terms of like increased advocacy? For example, you said the dashboard, do you look at utilization and you geocode utilization of the dashboard? So like, are you measuring how impactful your initiatives are in terms of whatever job placement, whether it be advocacy, like after doing the training, or people advocate or write letters to their legislators, like what are the measured outcomes or data from the?
Yeah, for sure. Great question.
So this is an area that we could improve on, to be honest. We do work with our data consulting group, Data Bloom, to track some outcomes afterwards. I don't think that we track the utilization of the dashboard. That would be really cool if we could do that. Yeah, that's something that we really need to improve on, to be honest with you. It's just and also we may do more than that. That's not like my part of the work, so I'm not an expert on that part of it, to be honest. But yeah, it's an area of improvement.
I can add to that. Also due to like cutting of funding and low capacity with our organization, yeah, like it's definitely something that we would love to improve on, like that the execution process of all of this and like what this data can go for. But kind of how our organization started is like the community education aspect is like our biggest priority, and like getting these community members, like first of all to be educated on these topics, but also coming together so they meet other community members and create their own little cohorts in the neighborhood to continue on the advocacy process. And but yeah, I wish we had like a better answer for how we track that. But we do keep in contact with everybody who's participated in any of our programs. We try and get people to come back. We do have a really close connection to the local government in Cincinnati, and a lot of the stuff we did was a part of the Green Cincinnati plan, which is to be updated in like 2030, I think. But we just had like a progress report. So we do like work really closely, and like that can be kind of an example of like seeing how this date, like what these programs are doing, like how it manifests in the community. But yeah, definitely something that could be worked on, and hopefully in another future administration when funding is a little bit more up, we can have more people added onto our team to be able to like continue and do more of an evaluation process.
Well, I'm going to say thank you to our speakers, and I'm sure you can come up, and we're also day one, so maybe you can find them after all. And thank you again. Like I said, there's a coffee break.